Hi everyone, welcome to ES's Easter event. We're so glad to have you here, even in the middle of mid-sems. I'm sure some of you are in the thick of it like myself, but very worthwhile that you're here, and we'll make sure that we wrap up at 10 to the hour so that if you have a class or anything you can run off. So no pressure to stick around if you can't make it. So this week with Easter coming up, we'll be remembering Jesus' extraordinary death and resurrection. And we're going to be doing that at ES here by answering UQ's questions about Jesus. So really looking forward to that. My name is Daisy. I'm a fourth year student here. I'm studying law at UQ and I love being part of ES. So if I haven't met you already, would really love to meet you. So come say hi after the UBT. So before we kick off, before we introduce our speakers for today and also the questions that we'll be answering, I'd like to tell you a story about my friend. So my friend is someone who grew up in a family who was Christian. She grew up going to church, but when she was about 16 or 17, started asking questions about whether or not she can trust the faith that she'd been brought up to believe. And the question that she asked me once when we were about 17 years old was, how can we be sure that the faith that we've been taught and that Jesus saves us, how can we be sure that that is true and not just what we've been brainwashed and taught to believe because we've been taught it since we were so young? And that question, I didn't know how to answer it at the time, and it really got me thinking as well, and my friend is still thinking about that, and I'm praying that she continues to think about that, because I really believe that if we ask that question and we pursue Jesus, I believe that Jesus wants us to ask those questions. Because Jesus has the answers to those questions, and we can really trust that through his death and through his resurrection, we can be saved. So today we'll be doing a bit of that. We'll be asking some really tough questions and seeing how we can answer them by using the Bible. And those questions, I'll just introduce them for us now. So the first one that we're going to be having is, how can I trust what the Bible says about Jesus? These questions, we've been asking UQ students what their questions are about Jesus, and these are some of the top ones. So we've got 3 today and 3 tomorrow. So the second one for today is, what happens after we die, according to the Bible? And the last one is, what has Jesus got to do with me? And then after that, we'll have a time of Q&A. So if you have questions here, you'll have an opportunity to put your hand up and ask our speakers for today your questions. Put them on the spot. So before we get into that, we'll have our first speaker up. Could everybody please clap for Emma Newell? Hello, Emma.
Hey Daisy, how's it going?
Great. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great.
That's awesome. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to tell us about yourself.
Oh, wow, I feel like I'm really not that interesting.
30 seconds, come on.
Yeah, cool.
You can do it.
I'm a third year here at UQ. I study law and humanities. Or what extra stuff do I do? I play hockey, I play a bit of social netball here and there, I play piano. That sort of fills my week, other than work, which I am a paralegal. And the most important thing about me is that I love Jesus.
Lovely. Pretty good. Pretty good in 30 seconds, not bad. And I have another question for you, Emma, before you kick us off. What are you doing for Easter this year?
I am heading back to my family's place at the Sunshine Coast, just chilling with them, going to church, pretty casual Easter, which will be nice.
Winning, that's the best.
Yeah.
Family on the Sunshine Coast.
Yeah.
Okay, so Emma, I believe you'll be answering the question for us today, how can I trust what the Bible says about Jesus? So I'll hand it over for you now.
Thank you. Alright, just get myself set. Alright, I want you guys to raise your hand if you believe Julius Caesar existed. Yeah, a pretty stupid question, right? Of course he did. No one doubts it. But what if I told you that there is not just evidence that there is more evidence that Jesus existed than that Julius Caesar existed? And that there's not just evidence he existed, but that he really was who the Bible says he is. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, whether we can trust what the Bible says about Jesus. Because let's be honest, if Jesus didn't really exist, or if the Bible is just a made-up book full of myths, then Christianity kind of falls apart, right? So this question matters a lot. I'm going to focus on the Gospels, which are the 4 accounts of Jesus' life, especially the first 4 verses of Luke. There's so much evidence that points to the fact that we can trust the Bible that I actually won't have time to go through it all today. So please do come and talk to me if you'd like me to elaborate on anything. So first thing we need to get straight is this. Pretty much every serious historian agrees that Jesus of Nazareth was a real person. We're not talking about whether he was God or whether the miracles happened. We're just talking about whether he existed. And the answer? Overwhelmingly yes. You'll actually struggle to find any reputable scholar today who claims that Jesus was purely a myth. Even skeptics generally accept that there was a man named Jesus who lived in first century Palestine, gathered followers, preached about the kingdom of God, and was executed by the Romans. Yes, the Gospels do include things that are hard to believe, but that doesn't automatically make the whole story unreliable. In fact, if we can establish the more ordinary parts of the Gospels as historically accurate, that might actually increase the credibility of the rest. So sure, the Bible tells us a lot about Jesus, but before we even get to the Bible, you might be surprised to hear that there's actually quite a bit about Jesus we can know from non-Christian sources. Really, when you think about the fact that Jesus was a rural figure in the back corner of the Roman Empire, it's pretty amazing that anything is recorded about him. So we have some external written sources that support the accounts of Jesus' life, such as the famous comments of Josephus. In Antiquities, he explains that Jesus existed and was condemned to the cross by Pilate, and that it was reported that he performed wondrous signs, and that it was claimed that he appeared alive to his followers 3 days after his death. This helps not just to verify the historical aspects of Jesus' life, but also supports the supernatural ones. As one author notes, so far from being sympathetic to Christians, Josephus was a Jew writing to please the Romans. This story would not have pleased them in the slightest. He would hardly have included it if it were not true. Josephus' statements were evidently of such importance to him that he was willing to upset the Romans to ensure they were recorded. External to the Bible, we also have archaeology. Now, I don't have time to discuss this in detail, but historians do believe that no archaeological discovery has ever controverted a biblical reference. In fact, archaeology actually supports many specific New Testament details. For instance, the Pool of Bethesda, once thought to be fictional as it lacked external confirmation, has since been discovered, confirming the accuracy of John 5:2 and its parallel in Matthew 12. While unable to prove theological claims, archaeology does point to the fact that these aren't myths, but real stories that happened in real places. But what about the differences between the Gospels? The inconsistencies, like certain stories happening at different times in the different Gospels, mean that someone got it wrong. Well, not necessarily. Think of it like this. You and 3 friends all witnessed the same event. You probably all tell the same story a bit differently depending on your point of view. That doesn't mean that you're lying. It just means you notice different details or emphasize different things. And the Gospels aren't just history books either. They're a mix of history, theology, and narrative. The authors had different goals, different audiences, and different ways of writing. We see Luke thoroughly investigating everything to provide an ordered account of what happens, while John wants to place more emphasis on Jesus' divinity, and Matthew aims to establish Jesus as the saviour of the Jews. If they all sounded exactly the same, that would be more suspicious, kind of like they copied each other word for word. So the differences, in a weird way, actually make the accounts more reliable. All right, let's have a look at one of the accounts of Jesus' life. I think you'll be surprised by how much it is concerned with evidence and reliability. Luke opens his gospel by saying, "Many have undertaken to compile a narrative about the events that have been fulfilled among us, just as the original eyewitnesses and servants of the word handed them down to us. So it also seemed good to me, since I have carefully investigated everything from the very first, to write to you in an orderly sequence, most honourable Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things about which you have been instructed." Luke wants us to be convinced that the stories of those who interacted with Jesus were true. They really happened. He talked to the people who were there and saw it. So here's another important thing about the Gospels. As Luke says, they come from eyewitnesses, people who actually lived and walked with Jesus, and they were written down during their lifetime. Now, in the ancient world, eyewitness testimony was considered one of the most reliable ways to pass on information. Richard Bauckham, in his book Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, argues that the Gospels were either written by people who saw Jesus themselves or by those who spoke to eyewitnesses directly. That's a big deal. It means the events recorded in the Gospel weren't just made up decades later. They were rooted in real memories, passed down by people who were actually there. And another cool point is that in the resurrection story in all 4 Gospels, the first people to discover the empty tomb are women. Now back then, women's testimony wasn't considered reliable in court. So if you're making up a story to convince people, you probably wouldn't have chosen women as your star witnesses. The fact that the Gospels do include them suggests the authors were telling the truth, even if it made their stories harder to believe. So, here's the bottom line. The idea that Jesus existed is one of the most solid facts we have from ancient history. The Gospels, while not perfect history textbooks, hold up incredibly well when you look at the details. Eyewitness testimony, non-Christian sources, archaeology, it all adds up. But here's the bigger question. What if it is true? Because if it is, then it's not just another ancient story like Julius Caesar, which doesn't affect your daily life at all. It's a story that actually matters to you. It's a story that tells you who you are, who God is, and what life is really about. Accepting that Jesus is real is important, but it's only a first step. So keep looking at who he claimed to be. We can't rest on accepting he was a great moral teacher in human history. Jesus himself doesn't give us that option. As C.S. Lewis said, either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. You must make your choice. So I'd encourage you, don't take my word for it. Read the Bible for yourself, ask questions, talk to a Christian friend. Because if Jesus and his claims are true, it changes everything.
Thanks, Emma. That was great. Just before we get our next person up, I'd encourage you guys to think about that. If you have any questions, write them down because you will have an opportunity to ask them later. And the next question that we have, what happens after we die, will be answered by drum roll. Oh, Joel, do you mind coming up?
Yeah.
Thank you. Just giving you an opportunity to get that
Wait, is it
microphone on. It is you. What? Is it on?
No.
Hope so. So Joel, tell us about yourself. You also have 30 seconds. Hopefully you can have enough to say.
Yeah, I used to be a student here. I did 5 years of engineering. I've worked for 3 years down in Sydney, and I came back, started last year to do a ministry apprenticeship. 2 years of my life to figure out what I do with my life. Been trained up in ministry and get clarity over my future. Thinking maybe I'll go to Bible college next year. Whether or not I go back to work as an engineer, I still don't know. But I think it's good to be equipped, trained as a Christian to be effective wherever you go.
Good job. A+. And Joel, I have another question for you as well. What is your favourite thing about Easter?
Do I get the midsummer break question?
Well,
So
I just thought I'd mix it up.
I prepared.
Oh, okay. You can answer both of those.
I love this week and actually remembering coming back to Jesus and remembering what he did for us. I think we can get so caught up in life and the busyness of life that we forget, and so it's kind of like thanks government to help us remind us of that truth.
Sorry, I didn't ask you that. And is that your favourite thing about Easter, or did you also want to say what you're doing this weekend?
I just wanted to answer what was I doing on the mid-sem break. I think when you hit 25, if either 25 or becoming a dad, I don't know which one, but suddenly you have this itch to mow lawns, to mow grass, and it's been raining a lot, and I'm jittering. I need to get on the ride-on lawnmower.
Okay, if we notice you jittering up the front door, we'll know it's not nerves. It's just the lawnmower itch.
Yeah, I'm so distracted.
Okay, I hope it's not too distracting then. Well, we'll hand it over to you now to answer the question, the really big question: what happens after we die? Thanks.
Thank you. Got to switch gears because it's a big question, isn't it? It's not a fun question, not a fun thing to think about. What happens when we die? What happens after we die? And it's big because we all die one day. There's no doubt about it. And there's lots of different ideas about death, isn't there? Everyone's tried to answer this question, what goes on after we die? Is there life after death? You might know the song, Bruno Mars and Lady Gaga. I think it's a great song. It's very musically talented. But this is what they say. If the world was ending, I'd want to be next to you. If the party was over and our time on earth was through, I just want to hold you for a while and die with a smile. If the world was ending, I'd want to be next to you. What do they think? Sounds like there's nothing after death. That's the end, and so make the most of your life while you've got it. Invest in your relationships. What matters most is romance, love, pleasure, companionship. Is that valid? Is that a valid conclusion? Does life have meaning if we just eternally lose it one day? Back in the 70s, an atheist called Ernest Becker, he wrote this book called The Denial of Death, and he recognised that death is inevitable, and that every culture based on some sort of religion, i.e. everyone, has a way of coping with death, how people deal with death. And this is what he says: if there's nothing after death, then nothing I do here will matter, because in the end, everything I do will be forgotten. After I die, other people will remember me for a while and remember things I did, but eventually they will die and nobody will remember. And eventually the sun will die and everything will be wiped out, and nothing you have done, whether good or bad, will make any final difference. So is it even worth investing in love, pleasure, and companionship? Life is meaningless. Our footprint may stay for a few decades, but it'll be washed away by time. So what is life all about? Is this all that we have? Well, a great philosopher of this age, Charlie Puth and Wiz Khalifa, have a different idea about this. It's been a long day without you, my friend. I'll tell you all about it when I see you again. We've come a long way from where we began. Oh, I'll tell you about it when I see you again. When I see you again. You might know the circumstances to that song. It's pretty tragic. But they are clinging somehow to this hope that death is not the end. Somehow they'll see each other after death. And isn't that a nice idea? That we'll see our friends, our loved ones, our family after death. But is it true? How will we know? How can we know? And maybe you haven't thought about death. It's in that unknown category for you. You know it's inevitable, but you just think, how can I know? You haven't seen what's after. You haven't experienced death yourself and come back. Have you talked to a dead person who's come back? Science hasn't shown us what's after death aside from our bodies rotting away. And so this idea of actually not knowing is actually pretty reasonable, I think. It's irrational to believe in something that there is no evidence for. In essence, this question is epistemological. That's just a really big word for saying, how do we know what we know at all? How can we know? How can we know what will happen after we die? The Christian story speaks to this big question. 2,000 years ago, there was a man named Jesus who lived on this earth, as we just heard from Emma, and he's the central figure to Christianity. And the historical documentation of his life from eyewitnesses, so people who actually saw him live, they witnessed his death. They record that Jesus himself died just like what we will experience one day. He experienced death under a brutal Roman Empire. It was a brutal death as he was crucified on the cross. He was buried in a tomb and his body rotted for 3 days. Dead. But after the 3 days, there were reports that people had seen him. Eyewitness accounts that this Jesus had somehow come back to life, not as a zombie, but as a living being. Not fully conscious, not as a spirit, but physical, fleshly. People touched him. This is somebody who came out the other side and stayed alive. He didn't die again. And nobody else in history has done this, not in this way, not in this obvious physical way. It's so rooted in history. And so we have new data, new information, a new way to know. Jesus' resurrection shows that it's possible, that there is something after death. Someone has actually done it. And naturally, we'd want answers. We'd want to talk to Jesus. Now, we're 2,000 years after. He's not exactly walking around, but we have his words in the Bible. And Jesus said many things in the Bible, but here's something that he did say about what happens when we die. A time is coming when all who are in their graves will hear his voice and come out. Those who have done what is good will rise to live, and those who have done what is evil will rise to be condemned. That's pretty big. That's Jesus' answer to this question. What happens when we die? Well, sometime in the future, we'll all be resurrected. But it's not a resurrection back to how things were when we died. It's not back to our career or to retirement, to our study or to our jobs. No, it's resurrection to a courtroom, judgment. That's what's in store for all of us. And Charlie Puth and Wiz Khalifa happen to be right, actually. We will see each other again. But it's something we might stand before God and be judged for what we do in this life. Jesus' resurrection validates his words. He's got the insight, this knowledge that none of us have. And so I think we should listen to him. What we do does matter. How we live, life is not meaningless. There's a bigger story and a bigger future. And perhaps you're here and you find this a daunting future. So I'd love to invite you to investigate this further with us here at ES. What does this Jesus who was resurrected have to say about life after death? What does that mean for how you live now? His words stand out, and it's worth listening to the guy who's come out of the other side of death unscathed. I'll leave it at that, and you can grill me in part 2 in the Q&A. Thanks.
Thanks, Joel. Really big question, really big topic. Thank you for unpacking that. I'm going to invite Steve up, who's going to answer our last question today. And that question is, what has Jesus got to do with me? But Steve, before you answer that question, do you want to have a crack in 30 seconds about telling us about yourself? Who are you?
Sure. I am a chaplain here with evangelical students. Been here for a few years, and before that I worked as a radiographer, taking x-rays and CT scans. I love any kind of medical stories and things like that, blood and guts. So if you've got some cool injury stories, I'd love to hear those things. And yeah, I love to play basketball, and I try and ignore the fact I'm getting too old for it and my recovery takes longer. But I'm also married to Jane. We've been married for 25 years in July, and we have 2 kids, Archie and Mackenzie, in grade 12 and 10.
Nice. Cool. Thanks, Steve. And Steve, did you want to answer the question about what you're doing in your mid-sem break as well? Otherwise, I have another fun question. Or we can do both.
Sure, yeah. Mid-sem break. I'm looking forward to having 4 days where it's nice to just relax, and it's like lots of Saturdays in a row. But I'm also looking forward to next week going and having some introversion time. I'm going to head off with my swag and go camping, maybe head up to the Bunya Mountains or something like that. And
wow, that sounds fun. Very adventurous, Steve. And I have another question for you. What's your favourite Easter food?
Favourite Easter food? Yeah. Lamb.
Really?
Yep, roast lamb. Because Jesus is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. And
so much symbolism with Easter food.
Yeah, that's right. So we're actually having our Bible study group over on Wednesday night, and we're going to have slow-cooked lamb for dinner.
Oh, yum. Can I come? That's you don't have to answer that. All right, Steve. Did you want to answer this question for us? What has Jesus got to do with me?
I'll give it a crack. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe this is a question you have been thinking about. Another way to think about this question is if Life in Australia is pretty good. We've got pretty good healthcare, education, beaches, flat whites. Why would I need Jesus? Why would I need Jesus if life in Australia is pretty good? I think it's a pretty fair question. When we have so much going for us materially, the claims of Christianity can seem fairly unnecessary or even irrelevant. What could Jesus add to my life? I want to explore what might be missing even in our relatively comfortable lives here in Australia. Many of you are on paths towards successful careers, and they are worthy pursuits that can lead to financial security and social status, yet many people who achieve their goals discover something unexpected. Success doesn't always satisfy in the way they thought it would. And this isn't just religious talk. We see it in our culture. Our most successful athletes, actors, entrepreneurs, they often speak about feeling empty at the height of their achievement. Studies consistently show that beyond meeting our basic needs, additional wealth produces diminishing returns on happiness. Why is that? I think it's because humans need more than comfort and achievement to flourish. And so I want to present 4 aspects of where the Christian story gives better answers. In a land of plenty, do we need more than comfort and achievement? Here are 4 areas I want to look at: meaning, mortality, morality, and membership. So if you think about meaning for a moment, the philosopher Charles Taylor describes our time as a secular age where belief in God is optional. This freedom, it brings a lot of opportunity, but also anxiety. Because without a shared framework for finding meaning, we are left to construct purpose ourselves individually. While this freedom can be exhilarating, it can also be exhausting. The pressure to create meaning, to justify our existence through achievement or experience, can weigh heavily on us. The rising rates of anxiety and depression suggest that something isn't working in our approach to meaning. The Christian story offers an alternative. That meaning isn't something that we create, it's something we discover. Your worth isn't tied to your ATAR score, your degree, or your future income. It's intrinsic to who you are as someone created in the image of God. What about mortality? Well, even in affluent Australia, we can't escape suffering or death. The bushfires, floods, the pandemic, the mental health crisis, they all remind us of our vulnerability. Our healthcare system, as excellent as it is, can only manage suffering, not eliminate it. The Christian narrative doesn't offer an escape from suffering, but it does offer a framework for understanding it and a hope that transcends it. Jesus himself suffered profoundly. What we remember on Good Friday, his crucifixion and death, it shows his solidarity with human pain rather than remaining distant from it. Christianity suggests that suffering isn't the final word, that restoration and redemption and eternal life are possible. And this perspective can change, it can transform how we face the inevitable hardships of life, even in a land of plenty. If you want to hear more about suffering, come along to tomorrow at 12 o'clock and we'll hear some more about that. What about morality? Well, many people are passionate about all sorts of things, but especially justice issues. Climate change, Indigenous rights, gender equality, gendered violence. This moral sense suggests something more profound about human nature that is really difficult to explain in purely materialistic terms. Where does this moral impulse come from? Why should we care about justice if life is merely about survival and personal happiness? The Christian worldview provides a foundation for human dignity and moral obligation that doesn't depend on shifting cultural norms. Jesus taught and embodied a radical vision of justice. and it challenged the power structures of the day, and it elevated the marginalised. Jesus' teachings continue to inspire movements of social change worldwide. Well, finally, what about membership? Despite our interconnectedness through technology, loneliness is epidemic. We have hundreds of digital connections, but fewer deep relationships than previous generations. The Christian understanding of God as Trinity suggests that relationship is fundamental to life itself. Jesus offers us not just a set of beliefs, but membership into a community that transcends social, ethnic, and economic boundaries. We belong to one another. As I conclude, I'm not suggesting that Christianity is a quick fix for life's challenges, or that non-Christians can't lead meaningful, ethical lives. Many are already doing that. What I am suggesting is that the Christian narrative addresses fundamental human questions that material prosperity alone cannot answer. Jesus doesn't primarily offer a better version of what you already have, more success, more comfort, more achievement. He offers something qualitatively different: reconciliation with God, forgiveness of wrongs, membership in a global community, and a hope that extends beyond death. In a culture that often reduces humans to consumers or achievers, Jesus sees you as image bearers of God, worthy of dignity and respect. In a world that measures value by productivity, Jesus offers unconditional love. This isn't about religious obligation or moral superiority. It's an invitation to explore a different way of understanding yourself and your place in the world. Even here, even now, even in prosperous Australia, the land of plenty. The question isn't whether you need Jesus to fix a terrible life. The question is whether there is something more fundamental to being human than what our materialistic culture offers, and whether Jesus might just be the key to discovering what that is. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, guys. I'll give you now have 60 seconds to have a break, and we're going to set up for the Q&A. So have a little think, maybe have a chat to the people around you. We'll get set up at the front with our speakers, if you guys want to come up and have a chat to the person next to you about what questions you might have, unrelated or related. Alright, guys, if you just want to, we're going to come back together now. I don't know, hopefully you can all see us from down here. You can ask any questions if they're related to something that we've already discussed today, or if they're unrelated. That is totally fine. These guys can have a crack at answering. Did anyone have a question to kick us off first? Yes, Yannick.
The verses that you pulled up, Joel, from John 5, say that those who have done good will be rise to life, and those who have done evil will rise to condemnation. Which doesn't sound like the rest of what I've heard from the rest of the Bible, where our salvation is not based on exactly doing good or doing evil. So, what's going on?
Yeah, because Jesus also says a couple of chapters earlier, chapter 3. John commentates on Jesus, and he says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life." Later on he says, "Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe stands condemned already." So you're asking, in one section of John, it's kind of like, is it just belief? In the other section, you're like, is it actually by what we do? And so the bigger question is, what's the interplay between our faith or belief and our works? And in short, our faith should produce good works. It reflects the faith that we have. And so it's kind of like if someone's claims to have belief but is not producing good fruit. Fruit is another image that the Bible uses, and you might want to question the faith. So they work hand in hand, and it's a bigger discussion. Yeah.
Cool.
Does that help?
Are you guys happy with that? Oh, sorry, my mic was not on. Are you guys happy with that answer? Yeah. Back Joel up. Yeah. Was there a question back
I
there?
think it's probably also like what's right in the eyes of God, like coming from like what our actions, if they're glorifying God or if they're for selfish interest is the evil part of it. I think as well.
Yeah. And so Jesus will say, like, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. And so it's a denial of our own desires and our own wants, but giving our life over to Jesus and submitting ourselves to his will, what he wants for us. And so you kind of have to know Jesus and what he says to actually know what that means to live for him.
Cool. Thanks, Joel. That was really helpful. Did anyone else have any questions? It can be about that or unrelated. Yeah, Ben?
What happens in the meantime between the day of judgment, talks about in John 5, and our death?
Yeah, so there's a few different views about this, but for Christians, in short, our bodies rot. So our bodies go to the grave, but our soul or our spirit, like it's another discussion whether you differentiate between the two, is with Jesus. So there's a couple of examples in the Bible. So from Philippians chapter 1, Paul, he says like that I'm torn between the two. So the two options of do I stay here on earth or do I die? He says he's torn between the two. I desire to depart this world and be with Christ, which is better by far. And so he's got this idea that if he dies, he's going to be with Jesus straight away. It's not like you're staying dead and your soul is kind of attached to your body. I think there's a sense where we're secure in Jesus when we die. So 2 Corinthians 5 also he picks that up. We're confident, I say, and would prefer to be away from the body and at home with the Lord. So there's this idea that we're secure. We're actually the future is heading toward one day when we'll all be resurrected. It's called the general resurrection, theologically is the word for it, where everyone gets raised to life. And in Revelation it says the books are opened and people will be judged. Christians have eternal life. It's a physical resurrection. We get new bodies. And the new creation looks like no more sickness, no more death. But for unbelievers, it's a different destiny. It's more like a resuscitation, enough for them to be judged and then cast into the lake of fire, is what Revelation puts it. So slightly different futures. Our bodies are dead until that day when Jesus comes and the resurrection happens. But our soul is secure in Jesus.
Thanks, Joel. Yeah, was there a question?
Yeah, so if our spirits go to be with God straight away, does that before the judgment? Or is that in like the meantime, or is it judged and then?
Yeah. So the question was, when we die, if our spirits go to be with God, are they judged then, or does that happen? Is the alternative, does that happen when Jesus comes back to judge? Yeah, great question. Cool.
Yeah, and that's hinting at the security that we might have now. Like, can we really be secure in our salvation now? Like, is the judgment in the future? Do our works reflect our faith that we have now in the future? So I think there's two sides of the coin to this. What's the question? My brain just glitched.
I think the question was, and I think Steve's maybe pulled up a passage as well if he wants to go answering. But I think the question was, when are we judged? Are we judged when we die, or are we judged on the day when Jesus returns? So did you want to answer that, or do you want to hand it over to Steve?
I could have one more
Yeah.
break. We're judged at that day when Jesus returns. But we have security now that we're not condemned to death, to eternal punishment. And that's on the basis of Jesus' work for us. So we could be secure now. The judgment will happen, but it's kind of like when God looks at us, he sees Jesus. And so this is a whole kind of bigger picture of salvation, that it's about Jesus paying the price for our sin, us having forgiveness on his work and not our own. But the judgment still happens in that end.
Yeah, the judgment day is still to come, but for those who put their trust in Jesus, that judgment day has already happened in a sense because Jesus has died and bore the wrath of God in our place. And so we don't need to fear or worry about what's going to happen on the day Jesus returns and everyone is brought to account, because that judgment day has already happened and fallen on Jesus. Colossians 3 is a passage that I think is a real comfort for us and helps us to understand what is happening. So if you have been raised with Christ, it's talking about if you trust in Jesus for the forgiveness of your sins, you are already living spiritually with him. You're spiritually alive with him. If you've been raised with Christ, seek the things above where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things, for you died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. So our lives as Christians are already hidden with Christ in God. So we are with him already, and as he is with us, and when he returns, we will appear with him in glory. And the things that we have done will be revealed and made clear, but because Jesus has already paid for our sin, we don't have to fear that day.
Cool, thanks for those answers. Oh, are you happy with that? I am mindful of, I think it's just hit 2:50, so if you have a class at 3, feel free to leave. But we might take one more question. Yes, Anand?
Emma, this one's for you. So you talked a lot about the historical Jesus as this flesh and blood human being that walked the earth, and there's a lot of strong consensus around that by historians. But how do we get from the man Jesus who walked around and was respected by all to a person who calls himself God? Is that something we have historical consensus for? Is that a fact that is that a claim that people are willing to say that Jesus made?
Yeah, I think it's those sort of theological claims are really hard to prove historically. Like those supernatural things you just can't do with archaeology, and non-Christian sources will mainly comment on people reporting those aspects of Jesus' life, but are not as much this is the truth that Jesus was the Son of God. Because at that point you're getting towards believing the gospel and the truth of what the Bible says. So I think we probably don't see that as much external to the Bible, but I think we can, based on those non-Christian sources that we have and sort of the things I talked about in my answer, I think we really can trust what the Bible has to say about Jesus, which helps us then have that evidence that he is the Son of God, that he is God. We see that explicitly in the Gospels. So I think we can trust that if the Bible as a whole is true, those claims are true as well. And I think looking at the evidence on a whole, the conclusion that those claims are true is really the most reasonable conclusion to come to. I think that's hard to get from an 8-minute response to a question, but when you look into it for yourself. So that's why I would really encourage you, if you are interested in this, go and do your own research. There's so many sources out there. I'm happy to give you some resources as well that I've looked at in my own research. But looking at all that content, that is the most reasonable conclusion to come to. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Cool.
Can I do that?
Yeah, go for it.
And I think looking at the resurrection and just seeing how everything hinges off that. Now that is something that's rooted in history. And particularly the resurrection is important because Jesus predicted it. So there's a sense where the truthfulness of his words really matters here. He said he'd die and rise again in 3 days, and it did happen. Even as far as extra-biblical sources go, there's non-Christians such as Josephus, who was a Jewish historian, attested to the resurrection of Jesus. So it's like if that's true, then you have a lot more confidence to believe maybe the other things that Jesus says about his divinity. I think looking at the history of the resurrection can be the gateway or the in into the divinity conversation.
Is it appropriate for me to say something
Sure.
as well? I think also, Emma was talking heaps about how the 4 Gospels kind of correlate with each other, which is really cool. but also heaps of the Old Testament, like parts of the Bible that were written so many thousands of years before, are also prophesying about Jesus and that he's the Son of God and what he's going to come to do. And so I think that is something that a way that I can be really sure that of Jesus' divinity as well, because there's just, and those sources there is archaeological evidence to prove that they were written then. They were written by these people in this time. And there's no way that at that point in time they could have known how they would be fulfilled in Jesus, but they're just so clearly fulfilled.
Yeah, I think one thing that's been really convincing for me is you can probably just look it up on Google Images, a diagram of the cross-references in the Bible, which is insane. Like there's just thousands upon thousands of them, and that for me, there's no way any human could write the Bible to have that many cross-references and for it all to perfectly make sense. So I think the fact that the whole Bible is pointing to Jesus, he is at the very centre of it, it really helps solidify that as well.
Cool. Okay, we might wrap up there. If you have more questions, feel free to ask any of these guys. They'll be hanging around. This is the end of our formal time, but we do have hot cross buns, I believe, for afternoon tea, which is super exciting. For those of us, for some of us, hot cross buns are our favourite Easter food, not lamb. We don't have any lamb this afternoon for afternoon tea, sorry guys. But yeah, thanks everyone for coming. If you need to head off again, that's totally fine, but we'd love if you could stick around as well. And we also have another event tomorrow, so if you just had so much fun today and still have more questions, tomorrow we'll be asking questions, how can Jesus be good if Christians are bad? The second question will be, what makes Good Friday good? And how can I believe in God when there is suffering? So we'll be doing it in a similar style to today, so definitely come back if you can make it. And if you wanted to get in touch with us, then please either talk to someone here or fill out this handy QR code. It's got multiple uses, but if you scan it and give us your details, we will be in touch. Or if you want to read the Bible with someone, read the Gospel with someone, please put that in the QR code as well, or just speak to someone in a yellow shirt. And yeah, if you have more questions for today and didn't want to speak to someone about that, then feel free to scan the QR code and ask it there. If you want to find out more right now, we have Bibles up the back for free, so go and grab one. Otherwise, chat to me, chat to one of these guys, chat to someone else wearing a yellow shirt. And if you would like to come to church this Easter and you don't know where to go or how to go about going to church, then also chat to someone. We would love to have you along to one of our churches because Easter's all about Jesus. So stick around for some afternoon tea. We have a round of applause for our wonderful speakers.
Next, I'd like to invite our second answerer up. Second answerer up for our next question, which is Renee. So if you'd like to welcome her up with me. Give her a second to get ready. Okay. So Renee, just like we did with Abby, let's get to know you just a little bit before you answer a question. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what your Easter plans are for this weekend?
Yeah, thanks, Rue. My name's Renee and I'm married to Nathan. I used to study here about 6 years ago, but now I'm doing an apprenticeship and being trained for the next 2 years in thinking about what it means to do full-time ministry and helping make disciples of Jesus through his word.
Sounds like an interesting next step in life at the moment. Yeah. And what are your plans for Easter this weekend?
I'll probably be resting, seeing some family, going to the Good Friday service, and relaxing.
That sounds nice. Well, speaking of Good Friday service, Renee, the question that you're answering for us today is, what makes Good Friday good? So the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Let me add my warm welcome from what Abby said. It's great to see so many people here. You may be familiar with the term Good Friday. It happens every year as part of Easter and means a public holiday for us, as well as a bigger supply of chocolate. Yay for some of you. I'm not a huge fan of chocolate, but I do have a soft spot for Lynch. But if we peel past the chocolate and the holiday, what actually makes it good? If Good Friday marks the day where Jesus died a public, shameful death on a cross, how can Christians celebrate that? How can Good Friday be good for you, for me, for the entire world? Well, I think we can all agree that life is usually better than death. That being alive is better than not existing. But life isn't always good, is it? I know that for me, there have been ups and downs in my relationships, in my physical and mental health, in what I can know and understand. I felt frustrated by the limits of my body with sleep and medication, and I faced the pain of asking loved ones to forgive me. Where is the good in those bad times? Maybe you can relate. For Good Friday to be good, we first need to be able to see the bad. Seeing the bad makes the good shine more, like a campfire on a dark night. The downs in my life, whether they are my shortcomings, frustrations or failures, all come back to the problem of sin. Sin is the next layer in the Easter story. It's an unsuspecting, lurking condition that affects all of us. It's a deeper problem than what we simply do or don't do. Sin infects our attitude and perception of God, ourselves, and others. It's really all about a guilty status before a righteous God. I see myself guilty before God when I sometimes say to myself, I can decide what's right and wrong, or I have everything I need in myself, so I don't need to depend on anyone else. Or I should do what makes me happy and put myself first. These hints of autonomy, self-centeredness, and self-sufficiency in my attitude are how I still sometimes defy God in my life. But the bad news about sin and me hasn't just affected me. It's affected all of us and our world. We are all guilty before God when we don't honour him as God or give thanks to him. We also fall short of treating the people around us with love and dignity. I'm sure you can agree you've hurt others or been hurt in your friendships and family. Even our land and ecosystems suffer because of our consumerism and selfishness. So how does Good Friday fit into this bleak picture of our lives? To peel back another layer, the good news in Good Friday is that God reveals himself. As Jesus dies, he shows us something about God. The righteous God sees our desperate, guilty state, unable to help ourselves, and he does something about it. See what is revealed about God from this verse. Romans 5:8 says, "But God shows his love for us, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." Do you see what this reveals about God? His love. Maybe you expected it to be his judgment. But as we unwrap the final layer to Good Friday, God's gracious, initiating love lies behind all of Easter. We see the astonishing good news that God loved us while we were guilty in our sin. This is the same God we often defy and fail to honour. This is the same righteous God who is fair to judge our unrighteousness. He knew we were desperately helpless in our failures, and still he loved us then. The God we failed to love reveals he is a loving God who graciously seeks to make us innocent. What a deep, wonderful love. But it gets better. Romans 5:8 explains how he loved us. It wasn't just a warm, fuzzy feeling. God didn't love us casually or lightly. No. We know that God decidedly showed his love in action, on Good Friday, in fact. Good Friday is when Christ died for us in love. Christ Jesus is the Son of God who lived to die for us. Jesus Christ is who God gave all authority to as his promised king, and he gave it all up for us. He now rules in power because he has overcome death. But the good in Good Friday is all about how Jesus' public, shameful death shows us God's love. He shows us the good news that we don't face God's judgment anymore if we trust in Jesus. The innocent Son of God died, taking the guilty place of people like you and me, to make us innocent. His death is good news for us because it brings freedom from guilt and shame. Jesus' death brings us into God's kindness. And if that's what Good Friday is all about, let me invite you to explore God's love for you in Jesus. It is his love that saves us from God's righteous judgment. The truth is that we all need Good Friday. We all need Jesus to die for us. We all need to trust that God really does love us so much that he would make us right with him at great cost. The cross where Jesus died is God's blinking sign to us of his love, pointing us to the great lengths he is willing to go to save us. Would you like to know Jesus better? If you don't know this God of love, you're welcome to investigate him more and what his death means for you. Good Friday marks the day where Jesus died a public, shameful death because of his love for us. He took our place when we deserved death so that we could be made innocent. What a marvelous, unimaginable love that God shows us in Jesus. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Renee, for the time and consideration you put into thinking about an answer for that. And I pray that you're all, and hope that you're all encouraged that as we have the day off on Friday from uni, that you, with gratitude, think about how good God has been to us so that we weren't the ones that needed to die and suffer, but that he did instead. I'm going to invite our third answerer for the day up. He is going to be answering our final question. And this is Dan, so I'd like us to welcome Dan as he comes on up.
Thank you.
So Dan, we know the process now. We've done it with two people. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what your Easter plans are for this weekend?
Yeah. So my name's Dan. I work with evangelical students. I was a student here. I did economics and business, but now I talk to people about Jesus for my full-time job. I am married to Ruth, and we have two kids, Sam and Rachel. And over Easter, I'm going to eat lots of hot cross buns, but that's not terribly new because I'm one of those people that starts on like Boxing Day as soon as they come out. I just love hot cross buns. So hot cross buns, Easter eggs, church, and see some friends and family. Yeah.
That sounds like a well-balanced weekend.
Yeah, not terribly. Not in terms of diet, perhaps.
Oh well, minor details. Well, for our final question, Dan, UQ has asked, how can I believe, or how can we believe in a God when there is suffering? So,
yeah.
It's all yours.
Big question. It's a big question to answer in a short amount of time. It's one of those classic philosophical questions that's debated in halls of academies, has been for hundreds of years and will be for a lot longer yet, I'm sure. But it's not just an intellectual question, is it?
I'm sure that for some of you, it is a deeply personal pain. It's a deeply personal pain if you've been close to any sort of suffering. Suffering that's your own, or suffering of those around you, your loved ones, family, friends, or even as you just look on at the horrors that happen in the world on any day of the week in the news, I'm sure you're drawn to ask this sort of question: where is God? What's God doing? How is this okay? How is it good? It's a question that comes from a place of really deep hurt, isn't it? Deep grief, even anger. Anger at God, anger at the world, anger at whatever is causing the pain that you go through or you see others going through. Let me open up a bit about myself. This is a pain that hits close to home for me. It feels like the last few years for my family and friends has just been lived under the shadow of cancer. A few years ago, a friend of ours who's in Christian ministry, is a pastor, his son with cancer died, and a week later, my own son was diagnosed with cancer. My son's come through it, but then just a few months ago, we in the family here at ES had the grief of losing our sister, my friend Kim, who's my age. She also told people about Jesus for a living, and cancer took her far too early. What is God doing? In the midst of these pains, we ask deep questions, don't we? And I think there's two things that we feel really deeply at times like this, two truths that we just know deep within us. One of those truths is that suffering is wrong. It is not the way it should be. Suffering is out of place in this world. Everything in us revolts against suffering. It should not be. The other thing we know deep down is we long for things to be better. We just have a sense that things should be better than this. There should be life instead of death. There should be joy instead of pain. There should be peace instead of hurt. Those two things just well up from us naturally, don't they? Revulsion at suffering and a longing for something better. So this is what our question is: can you really then believe in God in the face of that sort of suffering? Can you make sense of the pain on one hand, and can you find hope? Well, that's a question, but I want to actually start by flipping it around and asking kind of the opposite. I want to ask the opposite question: how can you not believe in God when there's suffering? I want to ask you because I want to point out that actually getting rid of God doesn't solve the problem at all. If you get rid of God, the suffering still exists. In fact, I think the suffering is even worse if we get rid of God, because of what it does. It takes away those two things we feel really deeply: the evil of suffering and the hope for something better. See, we know suffering is wrong, but without a good God, that suffering that you're so upset about actually has no meaning. Without a good God who defines what's good, well, suffering can't actually be bad. Suffering just is. And that deep conviction that you have about the wrongness of suffering, those deep convictions are nothing more than a personal preference when you really get down to it. Kind of like a favourite colour or a flavour you don't like. It's just your reaction to this thing. Now, we know that's not right. We know suffering is wrong. We know that that's a right revulsion in us against suffering. But without a good God, where you end up is you just got to say, well, it kind of just is. It's not inherently good or bad. Similar with hope, if we jettison God, then that longing for good, without a God who actually works good in the world, well, there's no reason we should expect any better. That cry of your heart for things to change, for goodness, for peace, for wholeness, that kind of doesn't make sense either. Because why should things be good? Why should they be better? Why should they improve? And who would shift the direction of fate in that direction anyway, if there's not a good God who could steer things in that direction? Whatever we believe about these big questions about life, the universe, God, suffering, they have to make sense of the world. They have to make sense of the world we see outside us. But they have to make sense of the world inside us too. They have to make sense of the longings we have, the convictions we have, the things that we just know deep in our gut are true. And so I think in the face of suffering, I don't think it makes sense to believe there is no God. There must be a good God to explain my revulsion at suffering. And there must be a good God to give me a basis for the hope that I have that things could be better and should be better, and that that's the way the world should be. But if there is a good God, well, how can it make sense? I think the Christian story explains it pretty well. Let's look at the Christian story, the Christian answer, in two parts, corresponding to those two convictions. What's gone wrong with the world, and where is the hope? What does Jesus offer? Let's start with the first one. What's gone wrong? The Bible's really clear that the world is not the way it should be. God made the world good, There was no evil, no suffering, no death or pain, but the world's not like that. Doesn't surprise you to hear that. The world is fallen now, corrupted. What caused that? Well, it turns out it was us. Humanity were created in God's creation to be his morally responsible rulers in the world. But rather than ruling the world God's good ways, we took initiative on our own. We thought we'll do it our way, and we rejected God's good ways. It's what the Bible calls sin. We just heard about it from Renee. And so the world is fallen and messed up because of our sin. It's a bit like if I took your water bottle and just dropped a drop of petrol in it. It's going to mess up the whole thing, isn't it? Just a drop and the whole thing is ruined. So we're a mess now, all of us. And so much of the suffering that's caused in the world is caused by people like you and me. Humanity are a mess, and we cause suffering for each other. But more than that, the world's a mess now too. The world just doesn't function in its good ways. There are floods, there's cancer, there's depression. And while we all naturally prefer our own way to God's way, I think we still know deep down that the world that we've made for ourselves is a mess. We've got that gut conviction. It's not right. Suffering is not good. So part of what God does is he leaves the world a mess to drive that realisation home, to call us back to himself, to wake us up to the foolishness of ignoring him, to realise we have not made life better without him. In his kindness, though, thankfully he doesn't leave us there. That's not the only thing he does. He's actually done something to hold out a hope of a beautiful new world. He gives us a picture of where he's taking things, what his plan is, in the second last chapter of the Bible, the book of Revelation. Here's what he says. He says, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God, and he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." This is where God's taking the world. It's an incredibly beautiful picture of the end to suffering. No more pain, no more death, no more crying. And it's a beautiful picture of the God who takes us there, a God who brings us into this rest with him and gently and tenderly wipes away the tears because he's moved by the suffering that we go through. He's not distant and disconnected. He's close and tender and wipes away the tears. It's a beautiful hope that the world would be like this, but I think equally beautiful is how God works to bring the world to this, how he shifts the storyline of history so that we end up here. And what it shows is his deep commitment to us and to dealing with the problem of suffering. See, what does he do to end suffering for us? Well, it's everything we just heard from Renee, actually. It's all about the suffering of Jesus on the cross for us. God's plan is to redeem and restore us, not just to raise us, the source of the problem, but actually to redeem and restore us and bring us to this restored world. And so he enters the world in Jesus and he suffers with us and like us and ultimately for us. The result is that he can then bring us with Jesus out of suffering and into this beautiful restored world. It's the events of Easter. It's Good Friday, the death of Jesus on the cross, and Easter Sunday, his resurrection to life again. Together, they are God's answer to the suffering of our world that we've caused and that he's solved. That's where things are going. It's the ultimate hope that we've got. But it doesn't remove suffering now. This world we still live in is still broken. But what it gives us is a hope that that suffering and pain and death, they're not the final word. In God's plan, life and joy and peace are going to be the final word. It gives us that hope for the future, but now it also gives us a sure comfort. In the midst of suffering, we can know for sure what God's attitude towards us is, that he is for us, that he loves us. If you look at your situation in the midst of suffering, it might look bleak, like God hates you or he's against you. But let's look at what Renee said as well. We look back to the cross, and what do we see? We see the guarantee of God's love. He gave his son into suffering for us, and that guarantees that he loves us, even in the midst of our own suffering, where we might not understand why it's happening. For me, in the midst of all the cancer over the last few years, it's this certainty that has kept me afloat as a Christian. I can acknowledge the suffering is wrong, it is not good, and I know that God agrees, and he's done something about it in the cross of Jesus, at huge cost to himself, to demonstrate his love and to guarantee for me that this is not the end. That he's bringing the world to a restoration where sickness and death don't get the final word. There is so much we could say on this topic. If you're feeling this acutely, I'm sure this is only just starting to scratch the surface. I'd love to talk to you about it further, if it's a real issue for you or things you'd like to talk about or ask questions, or you can ask them in the Q&A that we're about to have as well. But thank you.
Okay, so we might get started with our Q&A. So if you have a question, you can direct it at one panel member or just a generally open question to everyone. It can be related to specific questions about the talk, or just any question you have in general. So if there's any questions, feel free to stick your hand up. Otherwise, I have a question that I read on the board actually on my way over, which I might kick us off with while we consider it. So the question was, why does Jesus love people so much? Anyone wants to take it?
I'm going to have a stab. I mean, I suppose, it is a big question, isn't it? Like, why does Jesus love people so much? I mean, I guess one answer that we could start with perhaps is that that is what Jesus is like. That's the amazing news of it, is that he is so gentle and that he is so loving and good. And that he dies for us while we're still sinners.
Absolutely. It matches God's character, that he would love his creation and love those that are made in his image. I also think of what Colossians 1 says about, and Hebrews 1, how all things were created through him and for him. And so we as his people, Genesis 1 talks about how humans are very good. We are the most precious to God because, we are like him. He's made us like him and for him.
Any other questions from the floor? Now's your chance to grill these guys. Any questions you've thought of ever about Christianity? Yep. Just want to say it out loud?
Yeah, sure. This one's for Dan, actually. So you alluded to the fall of man in the Genesis account as being marking the beginning of suffering. And I was just wondering if you think you have to reject then the view of evolution to hold that belief, and if you hold to evolution instead, what marks the beginning of suffering?
Yeah, okay. Good question. So if the fall of man was the beginning of suffering, does that mean you have to reject evolution? That's a good summary. Yeah. So the Bible's really clear, I think, in that story at the beginning, like it's explaining where particularly human death comes from and human suffering. So there's no human death before the fall. I think repeatedly when it talks about that death comes in with sin and with Adam, I think what's on view there is human death, and I think certainly the existence of evil within the world that people inhabit. Beyond that, I think you've got to start asking a question of what are the texts in Genesis trying to teach? And that's a much wider discussion. But I think the evil of suffering comes in with sin, particularly for people. Beyond that, we've got to ask the question of what's Genesis trying to teach? Is it teaching the history and the science of how the world was made? I think even within the text, there's room for a world in the garden that's different to a world outside the garden. So Adam and Eve live in the garden, and the reason they don't die is because they've got the tree of life that they can eat from whenever they want. But they're made to actually expand the garden. They're to subdue and fill the earth. So there's perhaps even the possibility there that the world outside the garden is different. The world inside the garden is life and ruled by God's image-bearing people, and their jobs to expand the boundaries of the garden. Maybe there's something else outside. Christians take very different views on that. I know some Christians will say that there can't be any death before the fall. Others will weave in evolution as well. I think as I read Genesis, the things I want to make sure I hear is what it's teaching us about who God is and who we are and how we ought to relate to him. And I think the key truth we get there is we should have lived under God's good ways, and we've brought death and suffering in through that disobedience. How that works with science. Yeah. Abby, you want to add?
Can I throw in my thoughts as someone studying science who has but like thought a lot about this question? And again, what Dan said about lots of Christians will land really differently on what exactly kind of is the case. I guess one thing I want to say is that as a Christian, I think I have a better framework for actually a rigorous scientific method than someone who isn't a Christian. Because, in science we try and falsify things, to explore how things work through repeated testing and that kind of thing. Actually, when I do philosophy of science courses, they actually specify that you kind of need a worldview that assumes the world has laws. It has things that are consistent that we can find out via examination. And actually, if there is no God outside the world, and the world could just, there is no reason to necessarily assume the world is governed by fixed laws. And so actually, I think as a Christian, I have a really good framework for not only not dismissing science, but actually doing science in a really thoughtful way.
We can talk further if you want. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you for that question. Any other questions from the floor? Yes, after that.
I think the common belief or understanding is that suffering is God's punishment on people. What do you think is a helpful way to think about that, or a helpful way to explain that concept of suffering?
So I'll just say that loud so we can all hear. There's sometimes the thought that suffering is a punishment from God. What is a better way to explain or understand the relationship there?
Yeah. So two things I'd say to that. Generally, broadly, suffering in the world, is a consequence of sin. And so God allows the suffering to happen in the world, kind of like a parent with a child might, the child wants to do something that's a little bit dangerous. The parent might go, okay, well, off you go, and see how that works out. Part of God's righteous anger against sin is to let us actually suffer the consequences of the sin we've brought into the world. But that happens broadly and generally, and not on a one-to-one relationship between a person and their individual suffering. Jesus makes that really clear when his disciples are walking along with him. They see a blind man on the road begging. The disciples have that view of someone must have sinned to have that suffering. They say, well, who sinned, this guy or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus said, no, it doesn't work that way at all. So he breaks down that link between one person's sin and their suffering. And that's kind of part of the suffering that we just cry out about in this world is unjust suffering, or when you see people who are actually really not good, but they don't suffer. The Bible's full of lament about that as well, going, how come the unrighteous actually seem to prosper? I think that's also a suffering that God's intent on writing in the world too. So broadly speaking, suffering's in the world because of our sin as one of the consequences God leaves us in as our punishment. Well, not leaves us in because he is working to save us, but it's one of the consequences of our sin, but it's not one-to-one between a person's sin and their suffering.
That answer the question? Yeah. Probably got time for one more. Yes.
I was just wondering, because there is a lot said around selfishness being something that is wrong, and sometimes it's sort of, I was just wondering, how do you differentiate between necessary self-care and self-sufficiency as something that is empowering, particularly for historically oppressed or intersectional identities, and this idea of a blanket definition of selfishness?
Can I say that so we can hear? Yeah, I'm going to try and sum this up. So that idea of self-care and what was your other?
Self-sufficiency.
Self-sufficiency. How does that fit under this blanket idea of being selfish, especially for people who've been neglected or who need that?
Intersectional or marginalized.
Yeah, marginalized.
Self-sufficiency can be such an empowering thing. Yeah.
these are all very half-baked, but I'll give it my best shot. I guess in terms of like what Christians mean when we say like self-sufficiency, I think we can perhaps, if any of you guys might want to jump in as well, like there's like self-sufficiency in the sense that like as a Christian I believe there is a God and I'm not made to be apart from this God and apart from relationship with him. But then it's not necessarily saying that if I'm like independent in the way I like go about like my work or something that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that as well in terms of differentiating self-care and selfishness, I think that there is a lot that the Bible says about like rest and about being made like people who get tired and who like can't do all the things at once and that's something that's been a big struggle for me. And that yet I know there is a God who doesn't tire, and so I actually can take the foot off the pedal. And that's not a selfish thing, that's actually recognising that I have limits. But I think selfishness would be perhaps when I'm called to love people and I don't love people well. And I think that is to live in a world where people put other people first in a way because they love them. Is a better world to live in necessarily than if I'm always looking after it's always just like what benefits me first, when actually the Bible talks about putting other people's needs above my own.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to it, probably very similar, maybe just a slightly different angle, is I think the problem with selfishness or with trying to find your identity or validation from other people is it's taken from other people to shore yourself up. So selfishness is where you use other people for your benefit. And I think when we look to others for our validation, that's doing a similar thing. And that's why self-sufficiency can be held up as a virtue, because now I'm not looking to you for my validation, I can find that in myself. But I think that's also not the answer, because if we're creatures made by a loving creator, I think we're actually made to look to him for our meaning and purpose and significance. And when we get that from him and not from others, or not from even from ourselves, when we're filled with that from him, it actually empowers us to not be selfish, but to be selfless and give to others too. So in one way, yep, that self-sufficiency is better than a reliance on other people for those things. But even better than self-sufficiency is a reliance on your loving creator for meaning, purpose, identity, which fills you so that you can give to others. Yeah. But great question.
Thank you guys so much for your questions so far. We're going to call it there if anyone has classes or anything, but if you don't, please feel free to hang around. We've got, we'll just hang out here, so bring your own lunch. We do have a sausage sizzle up there, where the sizzle place normally is. So feel free to go grab some food from there, or if you have your own, and just hang out and ask more questions. These guys are around, but if you can't stick around, or if you want to, we'd love to get in contact with you. So please get in touch and you can explore further about what ES is, but also just who Jesus is and why that matters for your life. Thank you for coming, and have a good midsem.